There is a particular kind of silence that only comes at the end of something, not the silence of an empty room, but the silence of a room that has just understood something it cannot take back. I have sat in a great many council chambers in my career, in the seats of the powerful and the suppliant alike, and I have learned to read that silence the way a navigator reads weather. By the time the Verath Commission read what was on that data card, I had been reading that silence for the better part of a decade. I will try to be precise about what happened, because precision is what the moment deserves. The Joint Treaty Commission of the Verath Concord had been negotiating with Earth for 8 months. That is the word they used, negotiating. The correct word was extorting, but the Verath Concord had not achieved 3 centuries of regional hegemony by using accurate language in formal settings. What they wanted was control of Earth's mineral extraction rights across 6 star systems we had mapped and begun developing along what they called the Outer Verge, territory they had previously declared too marginal to administer themselves, right up until our survey teams found what was beneath the crust of those moons. At that point, the Commission rediscovered its administrative ambitions. I was appointed lead envoy for the negotiations. My government's instruction to me was 3 sentences long, and only the last one mattered. Do not sign anything binding on the Outer Verge infrastructure. I followed that instruction precisely. The first 4 months were procedural combat. The Commission's senior representative, a being called Archdelegate Verath, ran the standard playbook: delay, exhaust, escalate the informal pressure, then present a draft treaty as a fait accompli, dressed up as a compromise. We had seen that playbook before. Most advanced civilizations deploy some version of it. The Commission's version was technically proficient. They controlled the meeting schedule, the translation logs, the formal record. They introduced a clause in Session 11 that would have handed them supervisory authority over any extraction operation within a Commission-defined radius of existing Verath infrastructure, a radius that happened to encompass every facility we had operational on the Outer Verge. The clause was buried in subsection 44 of an appendix about dispute resolution timelines. I noted it. I said nothing about it in session. I filed a formal objection in writing 3 days later, citing procedural irregularities in the appendix submission process, which bought us another 6 weeks. The Commission did not understand what we were doing in those 6 weeks. They thought we were stalling because we were losing. The assumption was not unreasonable given what they believed about Earth's situation, a civilization that had overextended itself surveying the Outer Verge on thin margins, dependent on Verath transit lanes for resupply, without the leverage to walk away from a bad agreement. The Commission's intelligence picture was accurate as far as it went. What it did not include was what had been happening in the Outer Verge itself for the past 4 years. I knew what was happening there. My government had been specific about that too. They told me what was being built, and they told me what it would mean when it was finished. They also told me when it would be finished. The date the Commission chose for the final signing session was 11 days after that. I want to be careful here not to overstate my own role in what followed. I did not build what was built on the Outer Verge. I did not design the transit architecture or negotiate the private agreements with the 7 non-Verath carriers that formed the backbone of what my government was calling, in internal documents, the Independent Corridor. I did not do any of that. What I did was sit in a room for 8 months and make sure nothing was signed until the moment it no longer mattered what was signed. On the morning of the final session, Archdelegate Verath presented the revised treaty, a document that our legal team had spent the previous month quietly reshaping, clause by clause, until it contained none of the original supervisory provisions and all of the Commission's ceremonial language. The Archdelegate presented it as a Commission victory. The formal record would show a treaty in which Earth ceded nominal consultation rights on new extraction operations within the Commission's radius, in exchange for guaranteed transit access on Verath lanes for a term of 20 years. The Archdelegate appeared satisfied. His staff appeared satisfied. They had spent 8 months pursuing the supervisory clause, and from the outside, what they had in front of them looked like a version of it. It was not. Nominal consultation rights are not supervisory authority. The distinction matters enormously when the transit infrastructure you are supposed to be consulted about does not run through Verath lanes. I let the archdelegate finish his presentation. I sat through the formal reading of the treaty text. I sat through the procedural affirmations. I let him place the signing instrument on the table between us and let the silence settle. Then I placed the data card on the table beside the instrument. I did not say what was on it. I did not explain it. I simply put it there and waited. The Commission's administrative secretary picked it up and read it. She was an efficient civil servant, and she understood what she was reading within approximately 30 seconds. The 30 seconds after that were the quietest I have experienced in a diplomatic context. What was on the card was a routing map. Specifically, it was the routing map for the Independent Corridor, a transit network connecting Earth's outer verge extraction facilities to 11 commercial partners outside Verath jurisdiction, finalized 4 years ago, operational for the past 2, carrying at that moment roughly 60% of our outer verge output without touching a single Verath lane. The data card also contained the current throughput figures, the partner agreements, and a brief technical summary of the expansion phase that had commenced the previous month. Archdelegate Sarath looked at it for a long time. The treaty he had just presented governed transit rights on lanes we were no longer using in meaningful volume. The supervisory clause he had fought for would have given him oversight of facilities that fed into a corridor his commission did not administer and had not known existed. For 8 months, he had been extracting concessions on infrastructure that had already become secondary. He did not say anything for a while. I did not say anything either. When he finally spoke, he asked me, quietly, carefully, in the register of a man choosing each word as though it might break, whether Earth had intended for this situation to develop as it had. I told him that Earth had intended to complete its outer verge infrastructure development. Beyond that, I said, I could not speak to intentions. He looked at the treaty in front of him. He looked at the data card. He asked whether I was going to sign. I told him I was prepared to sign the document as presented, if the Commission wished to proceed. He sat with that for a moment. The treaty he had worked 8 months to construct had become, in the span of 90 seconds, a document that cost us very little and gave us a 20-year guarantee of secondary transit access we no longer needed at primary volume. The supervisory apparatus he had built around it governed nothing of consequence. From our side of the table, it was a piece of paper that bought goodwill and gave away nothing we had not already made redundant. He signed it. I signed it. We shook hands in the formal Verath manner, and the session closed. I have been asked, in the years since, whether I felt anything in that room when the Commission read the card. Pride, perhaps. Satisfaction. The clean pleasure of a thing resolved. What I felt was tired. Not the tiredness of a hard fight, but the tiredness that comes when you have been carrying the weight of knowing something for a very long time, and you finally set it down. For 8 months I had sat in that chamber and said nothing about what I knew. Watched them build their apparatus around the wrong target, let them believe they were winning, and held the line. That is not glamorous work. It is patient work. It is the work of a person who trusts that the thing being built elsewhere is actually being built, and who keeps the other side's attention occupied until it is. The Commission was not incompetent. They were simply working from an incomplete picture. The outer verge we had given them to look at was not the outer verge that mattered. The infrastructure they had spent 8 months trying to control was the infrastructure we had already moved past. When you are trying to contain something, you need to know where it actually is. They thought they knew. That was the only error that mattered, and by the time they found it, we had been somewhere else entirely for years. I put the data card in my coat pocket and walked out into daylight.